The October wind carried the scent of pine and frost through the parking lot of Elkridge State Park, where a silver Toyota 4Runner sat alone under the pale morning sun. Its doors were unlocked. The keys rested on the driver's seat. A half-empty bottle of water had rolled beneath the passenger side, and a trail map lay folded on the dashboard, marked with red pen at several points along the Cascade Ridge Trail. Detective Cole Harlow stood with his hands in the pockets of his wool coat, staring at the vehicle as if it might suddenly offer him answers. Behind him, two uniformed officers combed through the surrounding gravel lot, their boots crunching over fallen leaves. The air was sharp and cold, the kind that bit at your lungs when you breathed too deeply. "Anything?" Harlow called out. Officer Mendez shook her head. "Nothing, sir. No signs of a struggle, no blood, no broken glass. Just the car." Harlow nodded slowly. He'd been a detective for 12 years, long enough to know that the absence of evidence was often evidence itself. People didn't just vanish, not without reason, not without leaving something behind. The missing persons report had been filed 3 days earlier by Aiden Cross's mother, a woman named Diana Cross who lived in Boulder. Her son and his best friend, Mason Clark, had left Friday morning for a weekend hiking trip in the Rockies. They were supposed to return Sunday evening. When Monday came and went with no word, Diana began calling. By Tuesday, she drove to the park herself and found the 4Runner exactly where it sat now. Harlow crouched beside the vehicle and peered through the window. A duffel bag rested in the back seat, unzipped. Inside, he could see a flannel shirt, a flashlight, and a box of granola bars. On the floor mat, a phone charger coiled like a sleeping snake. "They didn't take their gear," he muttered. Officer Mendez stepped closer. "Maybe they left it behind on purpose, wanted to go light. Or they never made it to the trail." Harlow stood and scanned the tree line. Elkridge was a sprawling wilderness area, over 40,000 acres of dense forest, jagged cliffs, and winding rivers. Every year, a handful of hikers got lost, injured, or worse. But most of them were found within days, the ones who weren't usually turned up in the spring when the snow melted and the bodies surfaced. He pulled out his phone and reviewed the case file again. Aiden Cross and Mason Clark, both 27 years old, both from Boulder. Aiden worked as a freelance graphic designer. Mason was a bartender at a downtown brewery. Friends since high school. No criminal records, no known enemies, no red flags, except for one thing. Harlow tapped on a screenshot of Aiden's social media page. The last post, dated Friday morning, showed a photo of the two men standing beside the 4Runner. Aiden grinned at the camera, his dark hair tousled by the wind. Mason stood with his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. The caption read, "One last trip before winter. Let's see what the mountains have for us." One last trip. The phrase lingered in Harlow's mind. It could mean anything, or nothing. People said things like that all the time, but in his line of work, words had weight, and sometimes they were all you had. "Let's get search and rescue out here," Harlow said. "Start with the Cascade Ridge Trail and work outward. I want dogs, drones, the full setup." Mendez nodded and stepped away, speaking into her radio. Harlow lingered by the car, his gaze drifting to the distant peaks. Somewhere out there, two men were missing. Whether they were alive or dead, lost or hidden, he didn't know, but he intended to find out. By the time the search teams arrived, the sun had climbed higher, casting long shadows across the forest floor. Harlow joined the lead search coordinator, a grizzled man named Tom Garrett, who spread a topographic map across the hood of his truck. "They could be anywhere," Garrett said, tracing a route with his finger. "Cascade Ridge is popular, but it connects to a dozen other trails. If they wandered off path, we're looking at hundreds of square miles." "What about wildlife?" Harlow asked. Garrett glanced up. "You mean bears? Mountain lions? Anything." "It's possible. We've had reports of black bears in the area, but attacks are rare. Mountain lions even rarer. If they ran into trouble, it's more likely they fell, got hypothermic, or broke something." Harlow nodded. "How long until we get eyes in the air?" "Drone team setting up now. Dogs should be here within the hour. Good. Let's move. The search began in earnest. Teams fanned out along the trail, calling the names of the missing men. Their voices echoed through the trees, unanswered. The dogs picked up scents near the trailhead but lost them within a quarter mile, as if the men had simply evaporated. Harlow hiked with one of the teams, his boots sinking into the soft earth. The forest was beautiful in a way that felt almost hostile. The trees loomed tall and silent, their branches swaying in the wind. The ground was littered with rocks and roots, easy to trip over, easy to disappear into. After 2 hours, the drone operator radioed in. "Detective, we've got something." Harlow's pulse quickened. "What is it?" "Looks like a campsite, about 3 miles northeast of the trailhead. No movement, but there's gear." Harlow exchanged a glance with Garrett. "Send me the coordinates." They reached the site just before noon. It was a small clearing, tucked between 2 rock formations. A tent had been set up, its fabric torn and flapping in the wind. A fire pit sat cold and empty, ringed with stones. Scattered around the area were items that clearly belonged to the missing men. A backpack, a sleeping bag, a pair of hiking boots. But no sign of Aiden or Mason. Harlow knelt beside the tent and examined it closely. The fabric hadn't been torn by animals. The cuts were too clean, too deliberate. Someone had slashed it open. "This wasn't an accident," he said quietly. Garrett crouched beside him. "You think someone got to them?" "I think someone wanted us to find this." Harlow stood and surveyed the clearing. The placement of the gear felt staged, too neat, too obvious. It was as if someone had arranged it specifically for discovery, a breadcrumb trail, but leading where? As the team combed through the site, Harlow noticed something odd. Near the edge of the clearing, half buried in the dirt, was a small plastic bag. Inside were 2 driver's licenses, Aiden Cross, Mason Clark. Harlow's jaw tightened. He bagged the evidence and turned to Garrett. "Get forensics out here. I want every inch of this place processed." Garrett nodded, already reaching for his radio. Harlow walked back to the tent, his mind racing. The licenses bothered him. People didn't leave their IDs behind. Not unless they were forced to. Or unless they wanted to send a message. He pulled out his phone and dialed the number for Aiden's mother. "Mrs. Cross, this is Detective Harlow. We found some of their belongings." There was a pause, then a trembling voice. Are they alive?" "We don't know yet, but we're going to keep looking." He ended the call and stared at the clearing. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it the faint sound of something distant. A creak, maybe, or a scream. Harlow wasn't sure which, but he knew one thing. Aiden Cross and Mason Clark hadn't vanished by accident. Someone had taken them, and whoever it was, they wanted to be found. The days that followed felt like watching a film in slow motion, each frame revealing something new, yet nothing conclusive. Detective Cole Harlow had spent 48 hours without proper sleep, surviving on gas station coffee and determination that bordered on obsession. The case had embedded itself under his skin like a splinter he couldn't extract. The forensics team had processed the campsite with meticulous care, collecting samples, photographing every angle, cataloging every item. The results came back with frustrating ambiguity. No blood. No fingerprints aside from those belonging to Aiden and Mason. No clear indicators of violence beyond the slashed tent. It was as if the forest had swallowed them whole and left behind only carefully arranged remnants. Harlow sat in his office at the Boulder County Sheriff's Department, the case file spread across his desk like scattered puzzle pieces. Crime scene photos, witness statements, background checks. He'd gone through it all a dozen times, searching for the thread that would unravel the mystery. His phone buzzed. It was his partner, Detective Sarah Lynn, calling from the field. "Harlow, I'm at Mason Clark's apartment. You need to see this." "What did you find?" "Just get here. Trust me." 20 minutes later, Harlow stood in the modest 1-bedroom apartment that Mason called home. The place was tidy, almost to the point of sterile. Books lined a shelf in alphabetical order. The kitchen counter held nothing but a coffee maker and a single mug. The bed was made with military precision. Lynn stood in the corner near a small desk, holding a laptop. Her expression was troubled. His computer was password protected, but tech managed to crack it. Mason kept detailed records, emails, text messages, financial statements, all backed up and organized. Organized how? Harlow asked, moving closer. Lynn turned the screen toward him. See for yourself. The folder was labeled simply, Aiden. Inside were dozens of files, screenshots of text conversations spanning years, photos of Aiden at various locations, some clearly taken without his knowledge. Receipts and transaction records documenting loans and payments between the two friends. Harlow scrolled through the messages, his eyes narrowing. The tone shifted dramatically over time. Early conversations were friendly, full of inside jokes and casual plans. But as the months progressed, something changed. Mason's messages became shorter, more distant. Aiden's grew increasingly desperate. You can't keep avoiding me, man. We need to talk about this. I said I'd pay you back. Why don't you trust me? You're acting like I'm some kind of criminal. I'm your best friend. Harlow looked up at Lynn. How much money are we talking about? Nearly $30,000. Mason lent it to Aiden over the course of 2 years. Small amounts at first, then larger sums. The last transaction was 8 months ago. And Aiden didn't pay him back? Not a cent. According to bank records, Aiden's been struggling financially. Freelance work dried up, credit cards maxed out. He was drowning. Harlow leaned against the desk, processing the information. Friendship and money were a volatile combination. People had killed for far less. But this didn't feel like a murder case, not yet anyway. What about these photos? He asked, pointing to a subfolder. Lynn opened it. Inside were images of Aiden taken at different times and places. Outside a coffee shop. Walking into a building downtown. Standing in what looked like a parking garage. All were time-stamped, all taken from a distance. Mason was following him, Lynn said quietly. Harlow felt a chill run down his spine. Why would he do that? I don't know, but there's more. She clicked on another file, this one labeled October 10th, the date of their hiking trip. It was an email draft, never sent. The recipient field was blank, but the message was clear. I'm done pretending everything is fine. This trip is going to change things. One way or another, I'm getting what I'm owed. Harlow stared at the screen, his mind racing. Mason's words carried a weight that felt ominous, almost threatening. But what did he mean by getting what he's owed? Money? Respect? Something else entirely? We need to talk to Aiden's family again, Harlow said, and anyone else who knew them both. Friends, co-workers, anyone. Lynn nodded. I'll start making calls. The interview with Diana Cross took place at her home in Boulder, a modest 2-story house with a well-kept garden. She answered the door with red-rimmed eyes and a trembling smile, inviting Harlow inside with a fragility that made him ache. They sat in the living room, surrounded by family photos. Aiden as a child, grinning gap-toothed at the camera. Aiden at his high school graduation. Aiden with his arm around Mason, both of them laughing at some long-forgotten joke. Mrs. Cross, I need to ask you about your son's relationship with Mason, Harlow began gently. Diana nodded, clutching a tissue in her hands. They've been friends forever, since they were 15. Mason was always around like part of the family. Did you notice any tension between them recently? She hesitated, her gaze dropping to her lap. Aiden mentioned they'd had some disagreements. Money, I think. Mason had helped him out financially and Aiden felt guilty about not being able to pay him back right away. Did Aiden seem worried about it? A little, but he said Mason understood, that they'd work it out. Her voice cracked. Do you think Mason hurt him? Harlow chose his words carefully. We're exploring every possibility. Right now, I just need to understand who they were, what their relationship looked like. Diana wiped her eyes. Aiden looked up to Mason. Mason always had his life together, you know? Good job, stable, confident. Aiden struggled sometimes. He was creative, talented, but life didn't come as easily to him. I think he envied Mason a bit. But he loved him too. They were brothers in every way that mattered. Harlow made notes, filing away the details. Envy, guilt, love, the ingredients of complicated relationships. Did Aiden mention anything unusual before the trip? Anyone bothering him? Any strange encounters? Diana shook her head. No, he was excited about the hike. He said it would be good to get away, clear his head. He'd been stressed about work. And Mason? Did he seem eager to go? I think so. Aiden said Mason suggested the trip, said they needed to reconnect, spend quality time together like old times. Harlow's instincts prickled. Mason had suggested the trip. Mason, who'd been following Aiden, who'd written that cryptic email, who wanted to change things. Thank you, Mrs. Cross. You've been very helpful. As he stood to leave, Diana grabbed his hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong, desperate. Find my son, Detective, please. I need to know he's okay. I will, Harlow promised, though the words felt heavier than they should. Back at the station, Harlow convened a briefing with his team. Lynn had pulled records on both men, interviewed co-workers and mutual friends. A picture was emerging, but it was fractured, incomplete. Mason's co-workers describe him as quiet, reliable, private, Lynn reported. He kept to himself mostly, no close relationships at work. A few people mentioned he could be intense, especially when it came to fairness and debts. What about Aiden? More social, well-liked, but flaky. His clients complained about missed deadlines. Some said he overpromised and underdelivered. One former client mentioned Aiden borrowed money and never paid it back. Harlow tapped his pen against the desk. So we have a pattern. Aiden borrows money, doesn't pay it back. Mason gets frustrated, starts monitoring him. They go on a trip together and both disappear. You think Mason did something to him? Another detective asked. I think Mason wanted leverage, but I don't think this was planned as violence, not initially. Harlow stood and walked to the whiteboard where photos of both men hung side by side. Mason's email said the trip would change things. Maybe he planned to confront Aiden, force a reckoning, but something went wrong. Or Aiden fought back, Lynn suggested. Maybe. Or someone else was involved. The room fell silent. The possibility hung in the air like smoke, thick and suffocating. Harlow's phone rang. It was Garrett, the search coordinator. Detective, we've got something. Search teams found tracks leading away from the campsite. Fresh ones within the last week. They lead deeper into the forest toward the old mining area. Harlow's heart rate spiked. Send me the location. We're on our way. The mining area was a relic from Colorado's gold rush era, a network of abandoned tunnels and shafts that honeycombed the mountain. Signs warned of unstable ground and dangerous conditions. Most hikers avoided it. But someone had been there recently. Harlow and his team navigated the rocky terrain, following the tracks Garrett's team had marked with fluorescent tape. The path wound through dense underbrush over fallen logs across a shallow creek. It was treacherous, slow going. After an hour, they reached the entrance to one of the old mines. The wooden supports were rotting, the opening dark and uninviting, but the tracks led directly inside. Harlow pulled out his flashlight and peered into the darkness. The beam revealed rough stone walls, timber beams, and a narrow passage descending into the earth. "Anyone in there?" he called out. His voice echoed back, distorted and hollow. Lynn moved beside him, her hand resting on her sidearm. "We should call for backup. If someone's down there..." A sound interrupted her. Faint, distant, but unmistakable. A voice. Harlow's pulse thundered in his ears. "Did you hear that?" Lynn nodded, her face pale. They moved forward carefully, their flashlights cutting through the oppressive darkness. The passage narrowed, forcing them to walk single file. The air grew colder, damp, carrying the scent of earth and decay. The voice came again, clearer now. A single word, repeated desperately. "Help!" Harlow broke into a run, his light bouncing off the walls. The passage opened into a small chamber, and there in the center he saw them. Aiden Cross and Mason Clark, both tied to wooden chairs, both alive. The beam of Harlow's flashlight swept across the underground chamber, illuminating a scene that would haunt him for years to come. Aiden Cross and Mason Clark sat bound to heavy wooden chairs, their wrists secured with zip ties that had cut into their skin, leaving dark bruises and dried blood. Their faces were gaunt, hollow-eyed, covered in dirt and sweat. Both men were conscious, but barely. Their clothes hung loose on frames that had lost considerable weight over 6 weeks of captivity. The chamber itself was crude but deliberate. Someone had carved it out or expanded a natural cavity in the rock, reinforcing it with timber supports that looked decades old. A battery-powered lantern sat in the corner, its light dim but still functioning. Empty water bottles littered the floor alongside protein bar wrappers and what appeared to be a camping stove. "Jesus Christ," Lynn whispered behind Harlow, her voice thick with shock. Harlow rushed forward, dropping to his knees beside Aiden. "Aiden, can you hear me? We're police. You're safe now." Aiden's head lolled forward, his lips cracked and bleeding. When he tried to speak, only a rasp emerged. Harlow pulled out his knife and began cutting the zip ties, working as quickly as his shaking hands would allow. Lynn moved to Mason, who seemed more alert but equally traumatized. His eyes tracked her movements with an intensity that bordered on paranoid. When she touched his arm, he flinched violently. "It's okay," she said softly. "We're here to help. You're going to be okay." "Water," Mason croaked. "Please." Harlow radioed for immediate medical assistance, his voice urgent. "This is Detective Harlow. We found them. Both alive, both in critical condition. We need paramedics at the old Henderson mine entrance immediately. Bring IV fluids, blankets, and a stretcher team." The response crackled back with confirmations and estimated arrival times. 15 minutes. It felt like an eternity. As the zip ties fell away, Aiden slumped forward. Harlow caught him, lowering him gently to the ground. The man's breathing was shallow, his pulse weak but steady. Severe dehydration, possible hypothermia, likely malnourishment, but alive. Lynn had freed Mason, who remained seated, his hands now in his lap, trembling uncontrollably. He stared at nothing, his jaw working as if trying to form words that wouldn't come. "Who did this?" Harlow asked, his voice gentle but firm. "Who brought you here?" Neither man responded immediately. Aiden's eyes fluttered, consciousness slipping in and out. Mason turned his head slowly as if the movement required tremendous effort, and looked directly at Harlow. "A man," Mason whispered. He kept us here." "What man? Did you see his face?" Mason's expression twisted into something between fear and confusion. "Sometimes he wore a mask, most of the time. But I saw him. Once, I think." "What did he look like?" I can't remember clearly. Everything's fuzzy." Harlow exchanged a glance with Lynn. The disorientation was expected after prolonged captivity and trauma, but something in Mason's hesitation felt off, not quite right. "Did he say anything? Tell you why he took you?" Mason's eyes glistened with tears. He said he wanted to test us, test our limits, see how long friendship could last under pressure. The words sent ice through Harlow's veins. This wasn't a random abduction. This was deliberate, psychological, calculated. And Aiden? What does Aiden remember? "I don't know. We couldn't really talk. He kept us separated sometimes, other times together, but gagged. Always gagged when we were together." The sound of voices echoed down the passage. The paramedics had arrived faster than expected, likely having positioned themselves closer once the mine entrance was located. Within moments, the chamber filled with emergency personnel, their movements efficient and practiced. Harlow stepped back, giving them room to work. He watched as they assessed vital signs, inserted IV lines, wrapped both men in thermal blankets. Aiden remained largely unresponsive, his body too depleted to do more than accept the help passively. Mason, however, stayed alert, his eyes tracking every person, every movement, with an unsettling vigilance. "We need to get them out of here," the lead paramedic announced. "They need hospital care immediately." The extraction took another 30 minutes. The narrow passage made stretcher transport nearly impossible, forcing the team to half carry, half drag the two men through the tunnel. Harlow stayed close, his mind already racing ahead to what came next. Medical evaluation, official statements, a full investigation into who had done this and why. But beneath the professional checklist, something gnawed at him. Mason's story felt rehearsed, not in an obvious way, but in the subtle manner of someone who'd had time to prepare, to decide what to reveal and what to conceal. By the time they emerged into daylight, a full emergency response had assembled. Ambulances, police vehicles, even a news van that had somehow gotten wind of the discovery. Harlow cursed under his breath. The media would turn this into a circus before they even had a chance to understand what had happened. Aiden and Mason were loaded into separate ambulances. As Mason's stretcher passed, he reached out and grabbed Harlow's sleeve. The detective leaned down. "Thank you," Mason whispered. "Thank you for finding us." There was something in his eyes, something Harlow couldn't quite place. Gratitude, yes, but also something else. Relief, fear, guilt. "We're going to find who did this," Harlow promised. Mason's grip tightened for just a moment before releasing. "I hope you do." Boulder Community Hospital became ground zero for the investigation. Both men were admitted to the ICU, their conditions stabilized but still serious. Aiden remained largely unconscious, his body shutting down systems to preserve what little energy remained. Mason, despite his physical deterioration, stayed remarkably lucid. Harlow waited outside the ICU, drinking terrible hospital coffee and reviewing his notes. Lynn joined him after speaking with the doctors. "Aiden's in worse shape," she reported. "More severe dehydration, signs of infection in the wounds on his wrists. They're worried about kidney damage. Mason's in better condition, relatively speaking, though he's severely malnourished. Both show signs of psychological trauma, but they won't know the full extent until they're more stable. When can we interview them properly?" "Doctors say at least 24 hours, maybe longer for Aiden." Harlow nodded, frustrated but understanding. "What about the mine? What did the forensics team find?" "They're still processing, but preliminary reports show the space had been prepared. Someone stocked it with minimal supplies, water, protein bars, a first aid kit. Just enough to keep them alive but not comfortable. The chairs were bolted to the floor, the zip ties were industrial grade. Whoever did this planned it carefully." "Any evidence of the captor? DNA, fingerprints, anything?" "They found some prints, but they're running them through the system. Could take a few days. They also found something else." Lynn pulled out her phone and showed Harlow a photo. This was tucked behind one of the timber supports. It was a notebook, small and weathered. The pages visible in the photo showed handwritten text, dense and cramped. "What's in it?" "Don't know yet. Forensics wants to process it carefully, preserve any potential DNA or trace evidence. But from what they could see, it looks like journal entries, observations, notes about Aiden and Mason." Harlow's jaw tightened. "The captor kept a record?" "Looks that way. I want that notebook the second they're done with it, and get me everything you can on similar cases. Abductions involving psychological torture, tests of endurance, anything that fits the pattern." Lynn made notes on her phone. "You think this person has done this before?" "I think someone who goes to this much trouble, who's this organized, this deliberate. They don't just wake up one day and decide to kidnap two people. This feels practiced." By the following morning, Mason was strong enough for a preliminary interview. Harlow entered his hospital room to find him sitting up in bed, an IV still attached to his arm, his face cleaned of dirt, but still bearing the marks of his ordeal. His eyes, though tired, held a sharpness that hadn't been there in the mine. "Mr. Clark, I'm Detective Harlow. We met yesterday, though I'm not sure you remember much of it." Mason nodded slowly. "I remember. You found us. How are you feeling?" "Like I've been hit by a truck, but alive." He paused. "How's Aiden?" "Stable. He's not conscious yet, but the doctors are optimistic." Relief crossed Mason's face, genuine and unguarded. Or at least that's what it looked like. Harlow had learned long ago that people could fake almost anything when they needed to. I need to ask you some questions about what happened. I know this is difficult, but the sooner we get information, the better our chances of finding who did this. Mason took a breath, steeling himself. I'll tell you what I can. Some of it's blurry, fragmented. That's normal. Just do your best. Harlow pulled out his recorder and set it on the bedside table. Start from the beginning. You and Aiden went hiking on October 10th. What happened after you arrived at the park? Mason's gaze drifted to the window, where morning light filtered through partially closed blinds. We parked at the trailhead around 8 in the morning. The plan was to hike Cascade Ridge, camp overnight, then come back Sunday. We'd done it before, knew the trail pretty well. Was anyone else around? Did you see anyone at the parking lot? A few cars, but no people. It was early, cold. Most people don't hike that late in the season. What happened after you started hiking? Mason's jaw worked for a moment before he continued. We made good time. The trail was clear, weather was decent. We stopped for lunch around noon, maybe a mile and a half in. That's when... He trailed off, his expression darkening. That's when what? That's when we ran into him. Harlow leaned forward. The man who took you? Yeah, he was just... there, standing on the trail ahead of us. At first I thought he was another hiker, but something felt wrong. The way he stood, the way he looked at us. Can you describe him? Mason closed his eyes, concentrating. Tall, maybe 6 feet, 6'1", average build. He wore dark hiking clothes, a baseball cap pulled low. I couldn't see his face clearly, not at first. He had sunglasses on. What happened next? He asked if we were headed to the summit, casual, friendly even. Aiden answered, said we were camping overnight. The guy smiled and said he was doing the same. Asked if we wanted company. Said it was always safer to hike in groups. Harlow made notes. Did that seem suspicious to you? Not really. People do that sometimes, especially solo hikers. I wasn't thrilled about it. Aiden and I had things to talk about, but it didn't set off alarm bells. So you agreed? Aiden did. I kind of went along with it. Mason's hands clenched the blanket. We hiked together for another hour. He made small talk, asked about our lives, told us he was from out of state. Visiting Colorado, wanted to experience the mountains. All perfectly normal. When did things change? Mason's voice dropped. When we reached the campsite, our campsite, the one we'd picked out. He suggested we set up camp together, share a fire. Again, not that unusual. But when Aiden went to get water from the creek, the guy's whole demeanor shifted. How so? He pulled a gun, just like that. No warning, no explanation. Pointed it right at my chest and told me to sit down and shut up. Said if I made a sound, he'd kill Aiden first. Harlow felt his pulse quicken. Then what? Aiden came back. The guy grabbed him from behind, held the gun to his head, told us both to stay calm, cooperate, and we wouldn't get hurt. He zip-tied our hands, gagged us, then marched us off the trail, deeper into the forest. Did he say anything? Give any indication why he was doing this? Mason shook his head. Not then. He was quiet, focused, professional almost, like he'd done it before. We walked for what felt like hours, through parts of the forest I'd never seen. Eventually, we came to the mine entrance. Had he been there before? Was it prepared? It had to have been. The chamber, the supplies, the chairs, all of it was already set up. He'd planned this, probably for weeks. Harlow made more notes. What happened once you were in the mine? Mason's expression grew distant, haunted. He separated us first, put me in the chamber alone, took Aiden somewhere else. I could hear him screaming, struggling. It was... He swallowed hard. It was the worst sound I've ever heard. How long were you separated? I don't know. Time became meaningless down there. Hours, days. Everything blurred together. When he finally brought Aiden back, Aiden was different, quieter, broken. Did the captor explain what he wanted? After a few days, yeah. He'd come down periodically, bring water and food, enough to keep us alive but not comfortable. He'd talk to us, tell us this was an experiment, a test of human endurance and friendship. He wanted to see how long we'd last, how we'd react to prolonged stress and isolation. Did he hurt you physically? Not really, not in the way you mean. He didn't beat us or torture us in a traditional sense, but the psychological aspect. Mason's voice cracked. He'd make us choose. Who got water first? Who got more food? Small things that became enormous. He'd play mind games, tell one of us things about the other, try to turn us against each other. Did it work? Mason's eyes met Harlow's, and in them, the detective saw something complicated. Pain, yes, but also shame. Sometimes, yeah, sometimes it did. Harlow let that sit for a moment before continuing. Did you ever see his face, without the mask? Once. Maybe. It was dark, and I was barely conscious. But I think he took the mask off when he thought we were both out. I opened my eyes just a crack and saw him. But his face. Mason frowned. It didn't make sense. What do you mean? I felt like I should know him, like I'd seen him before, but I can't place it. Every time I try to remember, it slips away. Harlow made a note to follow up on that. Trauma could distort memory, but it could also protect certain truths that the mind wasn't ready to confront. Is there anything else you remember? Any detail, no matter how small? Mason thought for a long moment. He had a scar on his left hand, between his thumb and index finger. Looked like a burn mark, old but distinctive. That's good. That's very helpful. Harlow stood, preparing to leave. Mr. Clark, you've been through something terrible, but you survived. We're going to find this person and make sure he can't do this to anyone else. Mason nodded, but his expression remained troubled. Detective, when you talk to Aiden, when he wakes up, his story might be different from mine. The things we went through down there, what we saw, what we experienced, it wasn't always the same. He was in worse shape, more disoriented. Just keep that in mind. Harlow studied him carefully. Are you saying his account won't be reliable? I'm saying what we went through broke something in both of us in different ways. Just be patient with him, okay? Of course. As Harlow left the room, that nagging sensation returned. Something in Mason's story felt too neat, too coherent for someone who'd spent 6 weeks in captivity. Yes, some people process trauma by organizing it, creating narrative structure. But this felt different. It felt like a story that had been practiced. Lynn was waiting in the hallway. How'd it go? He gave us a lot. Description of the captor, timeline of events, details about the abduction, but what? But I'm not buying all of it. Something's off. You think he's lying? I think he's not telling us everything, and I want to know why. That afternoon, Aiden Cross finally regained consciousness. His condition remained fragile, but he was alert enough to answer questions. Harlow approached the interview with caution, aware that pushing too hard could compromise both Aiden's health and the integrity of any testimony. Aiden looked even more diminished than Mason, his face pale against the white hospital pillow, dark circles under his eyes like bruises. When Harlow entered, Aiden's gaze tracked him with a wariness that spoke of deep mistrust. Mr. Cross, I'm Detective Harlow. Do you feel up to answering a few questions? Aiden's voice was barely above a whisper. About what happened? Yes. I know this is difficult, but anything you can tell us will help. Aiden closed his eyes for a moment, gathering strength. I don't remember everything. Some parts are clear, others are just gone. That's okay. Just tell me what you do remember. Start with the hiking trip. It was your idea? No. Aiden's eyes opened, focusing on Harlow with unexpected intensity. It was Mason's idea. He said we needed to talk, work things out. This contradicted what Diana Cross had said, but Harlow kept his expression neutral. Work what out? Money. I owed him money. A lot of money. He'd been patient, but lately he'd been pressing me about it. Getting angry. Said I was taking advantage of our friendship. Were you? Aiden's face crumpled slightly. I meant to pay him back, I really did. But work had been slow, and everything just spiraled. I kept promising and not delivering. I know I messed up. So Mason suggested the trip? Yeah. Said we'd go somewhere quiet, away from everything, and figure it out. I thought we'd talk, maybe come to an agreement about a payment plan. I never imagined. His voice broke. Harlow gave him a moment before continuing. What happened when you got to the park? Aiden's account of the initial hike matched Mason's almost exactly. The early morning arrival, the quiet trail, the encounter with the stranger. But when he reached the point of the abduction, his story began to diverge. The guy with the gun, Aiden said, his voice shaking. When he first pulled it out, Mason didn't seem surprised. That's what I remember most clearly. Not fear, just resignation. Like he'd been expecting it. Harlow's attention sharpened. You think Mason knew the man? I don't know. Maybe. Or maybe I'm remembering wrong. Everything happened so fast. What happened after you were taken to the mine? He separated us immediately. Took me to a different chamber, smaller than the one where they found us. Kept me there alone for, I don't know how long. Days. Maybe weeks. No light except when he came with food. No sound except water dripping somewhere. Did he speak to you? Sometimes. He'd ask me questions about my life, about Mason, about our friendship. Aiden's jaw clenched. He knew things he shouldn't have known. Details about our relationship, about the money I owed, about arguments we'd had. Private things. Like what? He knew about a fight Mason and I had 6 months ago. Mason accused me of using him, said I only came around when I needed something. It was ugly, the kind of thing you say when you're angry and later regret. But this guy, he quoted Mason almost word for word. How could he know that unless... Aiden stopped abruptly, his eyes widening. Unless what? Harlow prompted. Unless Mason told him. The words hung in the air like an accusation. Harlow kept his voice carefully neutral. You think Mason was involved in your abduction? I don't know what I think, my head is so messed up. But some of the things the guy said, the way he focused on testing our friendship, on making us compete for resources, it felt personal. Like someone who knew our dynamic and wanted to exploit it. Did you ever see the captor's face? No. He always wore a mask around me, a black ski mask. But his voice... Aiden frowned. Sometimes it sounded familiar. I kept thinking I should recognize it, but I couldn't place it. What about when you were brought back to the main chamber with Mason? That only happened a few times and we were gagged, like Mason probably told you. We couldn't communicate, but I could see him, see his face. And detective, I swear, sometimes he looked more angry than scared, like he was furious with me. Even in that situation, even tied up and suffering, he couldn't let go of the resentment. Harlow made careful notes. Did the captor ever explain why he was doing this? He said different things at different times. Sometimes he talked about science, about understanding human behavior under extreme stress. Other times he seemed more philosophical, like he was proving some kind of point about the fragility of relationships. But mostly, he focused on me and Mason specifically. Our friendship, our problems. It was never about random victims. It was always about us. When you were finally brought together in the chamber where we found you, how long had you been there? I'm not sure. Time stopped meaning anything, but it felt recent. Like maybe a week? The chamber was different from where I'd been before. Bigger, and Mason was already there when they brought me in. He looked relieved, but also nervous. I couldn't figure out why. Harlow leaned forward slightly. Aiden, I need you to think carefully. Is there any possibility that Mason arranged this? That he hired someone to do this? Aiden was quiet for a long time, his eyes fixed on the ceiling. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. "I don't want to believe that. Mason is my best friend, was my best friend, but down there in the dark with nothing to do but think. I kept coming back to the same question. Who benefits from this? And the answer was always the same. Mason does. He gets his revenge for the money, for feeling used. And he gets to be the victim, the survivor, the hero who endured. That's a serious accusation. I know, and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the trauma is making me paranoid, seeing conspiracies where there aren't any. But detective, you asked me what I remember, what I think, and that's it. That's what keeps me awake, even now that I'm safe. The fear that my best friend did this to me." Detective Cole Harlow sat in the conference room at Boulder County Sheriff's Department, surrounded by the accumulated evidence of a case that had grown more labyrinthine with each passing hour. Photographs, transcripts, forensic reports, and timelines covered every available surface. In the center of it all sat the recovered notebook, now processed and released by forensics, its pages filled with cramped handwriting that revealed a mind both methodical and deeply disturbed. Lynn entered carrying 2 cups of coffee, setting one in front of Harlow before settling into the chair across from him. "You've been at this for 12 hours straight. You need to sleep. I need answers more." Harlow rubbed his eyes, exhaustion pulling at him like an undertow. "We've got 2 survivors telling fundamentally different stories. Mason says they were random victims of a psychologically motivated captor. Aiden suggests Mason orchestrated the whole thing, and this notebook," he tapped the evidence bag, "contradicts parts of both accounts." Lynn flipped open her own copy of the transcribed notebook entries. The writer is clearly obsessed with Aiden and Mason. There are entries dating back almost a year, surveillance notes, observations about their relationship, details about the money Aiden owed. But the tone isn't what you'd expect from a hired kidnapper, Harlow finished. It's personal, intimate even, like someone who knew them both well enough to understand their psychology, but distant enough to observe without being noticed. Friends, family, co-worker. We've interviewed everyone in their immediate circles. No one fits the profile. No one has the knowledge base reflected in this notebook. Harlow stood and walked to the whiteboard where he'd been mapping connections. But here's what bothers me most. The handwriting analysis came back. 2 different people wrote in this notebook. Lynn's head snapped up. What? The majority of entries are in one hand, but roughly 15% scattered throughout are in a second distinct hand. Same content focus, same observational style, but definitely 2 different people. So we're looking for 2 perpetrators? Maybe. Or Harlow circled back to a photo of Mason Clark taken at the hospital, or 1 perpetrator and 1 accomplice who documented their own involvement. The implications settled over them like a heavy blanket. Lynn set down her coffee, her expression troubled. "You think one of them was involved in their own kidnapping?" "I think one of them was involved in the other's kidnapping, and I think I know which one." Before Lynn could respond, Harlow's phone buzzed. It was the forensics lab. He answered, listened for several minutes, his expression growing darker, then hung up. The prints from the mine. They ran them through every database. Nothing on the primary set but the secondary prints. He paused, his jaw tight. They match Mason Clark. Lynn sat back. His prints would naturally be there. He was held captive in that chamber. These weren't from the chamber where we found them. These were from the entrance tunnel, the supply area, and on the notebook itself. Places and objects a captive shouldn't have had access to. And they were under other evidence, not on top of it. Laid down before the final captivity setup. He was there before the kidnapping. He was there preparing for the kidnapping. The decision to bring Mason back in for questioning wasn't made lightly. He was still technically a victim, still recovering from his ordeal, but the evidence had shifted the investigation's focus, and Harlow needed answers before the case slipped further into confusion. Mason arrived at the station with a victim advocate and a lawyer, a clear-eyed woman named Patricia Vance who immediately established that her client was cooperating voluntarily and could terminate the interview at any time. Mason looked better than he had in the hospital, having gained back a few pounds and regained some color, but his eyes held a guardedness that hadn't been there before. They settled in the interview room, recording equipment running, and Harlow began with careful courtesy. "Mr. Clark, thank you for coming in. I know this is difficult, but some new evidence has emerged that requires clarification." Mason nodded, his hands folded on the table. "Whatever I can do to help." "Your fingerprints were found in locations at the mine that don't align with your account of being held captive. Specifically, in the entrance tunnel and supply area. Can you explain that?" Mason's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Recognition. "I don't understand. I was barely conscious most of the time. I might have been moved around." "These prints were found under other evidence layers. They were placed there before the final setup of the captivity scene, before you claim to have been taken there." Silence stretched between them. Patricia Vance leaned toward her client, whispering something Harlow couldn't hear. Mason listened, then shook his head slightly. "I want to tell you something," Mason said finally, his voice steady. "But I need immunity, complete immunity for anything I'm about to disclose." Harlow exchanged a glance with Lynn. "That's not something I can promise without knowing what you're going to say." "Then we're done here." Mason started to stand. "Wait." Harlow held up a hand. "Let me make a call." 20 minutes later, after a hurried conference with the district attorney's office, a preliminary immunity agreement was drafted. Mason would receive immunity from prosecution for any crimes he disclosed during this interview, contingent on his full and truthful cooperation. If he lied or withheld information, the agreement was void. Mason read the document carefully, signed it, and then looked directly at Harlow. "I hired someone to scare Aiden, not to hurt him, not to kidnap him for 6 weeks, just to scare him." The confession landed like a bomb in the small room. Lynn's pen stopped mid-note. Harlow kept his expression neutral, though his pulse had accelerated. "Explain." Mason took a breath, organizing his thoughts. "Aiden owed me $30,000, but it wasn't just about the money, it was about respect. Every time I saw him, he had a new excuse. Work was slow. He'd pay me next month. He just needed a little more time. Meanwhile, he was posting on social media about concerts he attended, restaurants he tried, trips he took. He had money. He just didn't want to pay me back." "So you decided to frighten him?" "I decided to make him understand consequences. I found this guy online through some forums. A survivalist type who did extreme training courses, taught people how to handle crisis situations. He had a side business doing unconventional jobs, scaring people mostly, making them think they were in danger to teach them lessons." "What was his name?" "He called himself Garrett. I don't know if that was real. We communicated mostly through encrypted messages. He was careful about his identity." "How did you find him?" "A friend of a friend mentioned him. Said Garrett had helped solve a problem with someone who wouldn't pay a gambling debt. I reached out, explained my situation. Garrett proposed what he called an immersive correction experience. Take Aiden on a hiking trip, stage an abduction, hold him for maybe 24 hours in uncomfortable conditions, then let him go with a message about keeping his commitments. Scare him straight, basically." Harlow leaned forward. "But that's not what happened." Mason's composure cracked slightly. "No, it's not. I paid Garrett $5,000 up front, another $5,000 after the job was done. We planned everything carefully. I suggested the hiking trip to Aiden, picked the trail, even chose the timing. Garrett was supposed to randomly encounter us, then stage the abduction. Keep Aiden overnight, let me escape, and I'd report it to police. Aiden would be found the next day, shaken but unharmed. He'd get the message, pay me back, and life would continue. But Garrett didn't stick to the plan. He went completely off script. Instead of keeping us overnight, he took us deeper into the wilderness. Instead of separating us briefly, he held us for weeks. He wasn't just scaring Aiden, he was torturing both of us. psychologically, physically, through deprivation. I tried to signal him, tried to remind him of our agreement, but he acted like he didn't know me, like I was just another victim. Lynn spoke for the first time. "You're saying he betrayed you. I'm saying he's insane. Whatever deal we made, whatever I thought I was hiring him to do, he turned it into something completely different. His own twisted experiment." Harlow studied Mason carefully. The story had the ring of truth, but also convenient explanations. "The notebook we found, was that yours?" Mason hesitated. "Some of it. Garrett asked me to document observations about Aiden, things about his personality, his habits, his reactions to stress. He said it would help him tailor the experience. I thought I was providing background information for a one-day scare tactic. I didn't know he was going to use it to psychologically dissect both of us for 6 weeks. So you admit you helped plan Aiden's kidnapping?" "I admit I hired someone to scare him. What that person did was way beyond anything I authorized or imagined. I became a victim of my own stupidity," Patricia Vance interjected. "My client has been fully cooperative and transparent. He's a victim here, Detective. He made a poor decision, but he didn't intend for this outcome." Harlow ignored her. "Do you have any way to contact Garrett? Any records of your communications?" "I deleted everything after the first week when I realized something was wrong. I thought maybe if I removed any connection between us, I could claim complete innocence when we were found. I didn't know how else to survive the situation." "Convenient," Lynn muttered. Mason's eyes flashed. "You think this was convenient? You think spending 6 weeks in hell, losing 20 pounds, being psychologically tortured alongside someone I was trying to teach a lesson to was convenient? Garrett played me as much as he played Aiden, maybe more because I thought I was in control." Harlow stood and paced the small room. "Here's my problem, Mr. Clark. Your story explains some of the evidence, but not all of it. Why would Garrett, this hired gun, go so far beyond your agreement? What's his motivation?" "I don't know. Maybe he's genuinely crazy. Maybe he saw an opportunity to conduct his sick experiment and took it. Maybe he figured I couldn't report him without incriminating myself. All I know is I hired him for one thing, and he did something completely different." "And Aiden? Did he ever figure out you were involved?" Mason's expression grew haunted. "I don't think so. Not at first. But toward the end, down in that chamber, I could see him looking at me differently, like he was putting pieces together. When you found us, I was terrified he'd figured it out and would tell you. That's why I tried to control the narrative in the hospital. I knew if the truth came out, my life was over." "Your life?" Lynn's voice was sharp. "Aiden almost died because of your lesson." "I know!" Mason's composure finally broke. "You think I don't know that? You think I don't see his face every time I close my eyes? I made a terrible mistake. I trusted the wrong person, and it spiraled into a nightmare I couldn't stop. But I didn't want this. I never wanted him actually hurt." After Mason's interview concluded, Harlow and Lynn regrouped in the conference room. The immunity agreement meant they couldn't prosecute Mason for his role in initiating the kidnapping, but they could still pursue the mysterious Garrett for the actual crime. "Do you believe him?" Lynn asked. Harlow considered the question carefully. "I believe he hired someone to scare Aiden. I believe that person exceeded the scope of the agreement, but I'm not sure I believe he's telling us everything. There's something else, something he's still hiding." "Like what?" "Like maybe he and Garrett had more communication than he admits. Maybe the escalation wasn't entirely unauthorized. Maybe Mason paid extra for a more intense experience and is now backtracking because it went too far." Lynn pulled up the notebook entries on her laptop. "If we compare the handwriting in Mason's known samples with the secondary entries in the notebook, we can confirm his involvement in creating it. But the primary entries, the bulk of the observations and planning, those are still from an unknown person, presumably Garrett. We need to find Garrett. Real name, location, everything. Start with those survivalist forums Mason mentioned. Someone there knows who he really is." The search for Garrett consumed the next 72 hours. Cybercrimes Division traced Mason's online activity. finding breadcrumbs in encrypted forums and deleted message threads. The profile of their suspect began to emerge. A man in his late 30s, former military, with training in psychological operations. He'd been dishonorably discharged after an incident involving unauthorized interrogation techniques on civilian contractors overseas. His real name was Garrett Mitchell, and he had a history of escalating behavior. What started as legitimate survival training courses had gradually morphed into something darker. Several former clients complained about overly intense experiences, borderline abusive conditions, psychological manipulation disguised as character building. Mitchell had dropped off the grid 3 years earlier, living off-grid in the Colorado mountains, taking cash-only jobs that skirted or outright violated the law. He was smart, cautious, and experienced in evading detection. But he'd made one mistake. The battery-powered lantern found in the chamber had been purchased online, shipped to a P.O. box in a small mountain town called Fairplay. Lynn and Harlow made the drive, arriving in the fading light of a cold November afternoon. The postmaster, a woman in her 60s named Ruth, remembered Garrett Mitchell. Kept to himself mostly, she said, pulling records. Picked up packages every few weeks, always paid cash for the box rental. Gave an address that turned out to be fake, but we don't verify unless there's a problem. Do you know where he actually lived? Harlow asked. Not exactly, but I saw him once heading up Forest Service Road 402. That leads to some old mining claims and abandoned cabins. People trying to live off-grid sometimes squat in those areas. Armed with this information, Harlow coordinated with the Park County Sheriff's Department. A search team was assembled, including officers familiar with the backcountry terrain. They set out at first light, hiking into increasingly remote territory. Forest Service Road 402 eventually became a dirt track, then a footpath, then barely a trail at all. After 3 hours of hiking, they found signs of habitation. A solar panel half hidden under camouflage netting, a water collection system, and finally a cabin built partially underground, invisible until you were almost on top of it. Harlow approached cautiously, his weapon drawn. Garrett Mitchell, Boulder County Sheriff's Department, come out with your hands visible. Silence answered. The cabin door hung slightly ajar, creaking in the wind. The tactical team cleared the structure room by room. It was empty. But inside they found evidence that confirmed everything. Maps of Elkridge State Park with the Henderson mine marked. Zip ties matching those used on Aiden and Mason. And most damning, a second copy of the notebook. This one with additional entries made after the rescue. The final entry was dated just 2 days earlier. The experiment concluded prematurely, but results were still illuminating. Mason's capacity for rationalization exceeded predictions. Aiden's resilience was stronger than anticipated. Both subjects demonstrated the flexibility of moral boundaries under sustained pressure. The true test was not their endurance, but their willingness to betray each other. In that, both failed and succeeded simultaneously. The question of who was predator and who was prey remains beautifully ambiguous. Perhaps that was always the point. Harlow photographed every page, every piece of evidence. A forensics team was called in to process the cabin. But Garrett Mitchell himself had vanished, likely alerted somehow to the investigation closing in. An APB was issued. Mitchell's photo was distributed to law enforcement agencies across the western states. But Harlow knew from experience that a man with his training could disappear for years if he wanted to. Back in Boulder, Aiden Cross was informed of the investigation's findings. Harlow met with him in a quiet room at the hospital, where Aiden was preparing for discharge after 2 weeks of recovery. Mason hired someone to kidnap you, Harlow said without preamble. Not for 6 weeks, not for the extent of what happened. But he initiated it. He paid a man named Garrett Mitchell to scare you as punishment for not paying back the money you owed. Aiden's face went through a series of emotions. Shock, denial, anger, and finally, a terrible understanding. So I was right. He did this to me. He claims Mitchell exceeded the scope of their agreement, that it was supposed to be a brief scare, maybe one night, and Mitchell turned it into something much worse. We have evidence supporting that Mitchell is genuinely disturbed and likely did escalate beyond what Mason hired him to do. But Mason started it. Yes. Aiden stared at his hands, which still bore the scars from the zip ties. My best friend. The person I trusted most in the world. He did this to me over money. The district attorney has reviewed the immunity agreement Mason received. Because he cooperated and because we need his testimony to eventually prosecute Mitchell, he won't face charges related to the conspiracy to kidnap. But there may be civil remedies available to you. Civil remedies. Aiden laughed bitterly. He put me through 6 weeks of hell, and I can maybe sue him? That's justice? Harlow had no good answer for that. The law had many gaps, and this case had fallen into one of them. Mason's initial crime had been swallowed by the immunity agreement. Mitchell's greater crimes remained unpunished because he disappeared, and Aiden was left holding the trauma of both. I know it's not enough, Harlow said quietly. I know nothing can undo what happened to you. But Mitchell will be found eventually. Men like him always slip up. And when he is, he'll face the full weight of the law. And Mason? Mason has to live with what he did, with the knowledge that his need for revenge created a monster he couldn't control. That's not legal justice, but it's something. Aiden nodded slowly. Can I ask you something, detective? When you were investigating before you knew about Mason's involvement, did you suspect me? Did you think maybe I'd done something to deserve this? Harlow met his eyes honestly. I considered every possibility. That's my job. But no, I never thought you deserved what happened. No one deserves that, regardless of their mistakes. I did owe him money. I did break promises. I wasn't a good friend in that respect. Owing money doesn't justify kidnapping. Breaking promises doesn't justify torture. You made mistakes, yes. But what was done to you was in no way proportional or justified. Tears welled in Aiden's eyes. Why didn't he just talk to me? Why didn't he tell me how angry he was? We could have worked something out. Payment plan, whatever. Instead, he did this. I don't know. Maybe he felt powerless and this was his way of taking control. Maybe he convinced himself it was justice. People rationalize terrible things when they feel wronged. Aiden wiped his eyes. What happens now? You heal, you get counseling, you rebuild your life, and you decide whether you want to pursue civil action against Mason. Will I have to see him? At trial for Mitchell if he's caught? Possibly, but that's a long way off if it happens at all. For now, focus on yourself. The case officially remained open due to Garrett Mitchell's fugitive status, but the immediate investigation wound down. Mason Clark moved out of Boulder, relocating to a different state where his name wouldn't immediately trigger recognition. He gave several interviews expressing remorse, though public opinion remained sharply divided on whether his punishment fit his crime. Aiden Cross entered intensive therapy, working through the psychological trauma of his ordeal. He struggled with trust, with anger, with a sense of betrayal that went deeper than the physical suffering. His relationship with his mother strengthened, but friendships became difficult. How could he trust anyone when his closest friend had orchestrated his kidnapping? Detective Harlow kept the Mitchell file on his desk, reviewing it periodically, hoping for a break. Tips came in sporadically, possible sightings in Oregon, Montana, even Mexico. Each was investigated and dismissed. Mitchell had become a ghost, and Harlow suspected he'd remain one for a long time. 6 months after the rescue, Harlow received an unexpected visitor. Aiden Cross walked into his office unannounced, looking healthier than he had in the hospital but carrying a weight that had nothing to do with physical appearance. Detective, I wanted to give you this. Aiden handed him a flash drive. I've been writing about what happened. My therapist suggested it as a processing tool, but as I wrote, I realized it might be useful for your investigation. Things I remember that didn't make it into official statements. Details about Mitchell's behavior, patterns, and how he operated. Maybe it'll help when you catch him. Harlow accepted the flash drive. Thank you. This could be valuable. Aiden sat down without being invited. I also wanted to ask your professional opinion on something. What's that? Do you think Mason knew how far Mitchell would take it? Do you think he suspected it would become more than just a scare? Harlow had thought about this question many times. Honestly, I think Mason knew Mitchell was dangerous. I think he chose someone unpredictable because part of him wanted you to suffer more than just a brief fright. But I don't think he imagined 6 weeks. I don't think he wanted you to almost die. He wanted you punished, not destroyed. The problem is, once you unleash someone like Mitchell, you lose control of the outcome. So he's guilty of recklessness but not attempted murder. In my professional opinion, yes. Aiden absorbed this. I've thought about reaching out to him. Mason, confronting him, asking him face to face why he did it. Would it help? I don't know. Probably not. He'd just tell me the same things he told you, that he didn't mean for it to go that far, that he's sorry, that he was stupid and angry. Words that don't change anything. Then maybe the answer is to not give him that opportunity, to move forward without his explanations. Is that what you'd do? Harlow thought about the question carefully. I've seen a lot of victims in my career. Some need confrontation to heal. Others need distance. There's no right answer. You have to decide what serves your healing, not what satisfies your anger or his guilt. Aiden stood to leave, then paused at the door. If you catch Mitchell, will you let me know? I'd like to be there when he's held accountable. Even if Mason escapes justice, I want to see Mitchell face it. You'll be the first person I call. After Aiden left, Harlow plugged in the flash drive and began reading. The document was over 200 pages, a detailed account of the kidnapping from Aiden's perspective. It was raw, painful, and filled with observations that hadn't made it into the police reports. One section in particular caught Harlow's attention. On what I think was day 37, Mitchell came into the chamber and spoke to both of us without the mask. He looked tired, almost disappointed. He said something I'll never forget. The problem with testing friendship is that sometimes you prove it's stronger than you wanted it to be, and sometimes you prove it never existed at all. I'm still not sure which outcome you two represent. Then he put the mask back on and left. Mason and I couldn't speak because of the gags, but I saw his face. He looked scared. Not of Mitchell, of what Mitchell had said. Like maybe he'd realized for the first time that our friendship, despite everything, had been real, and he'd destroyed it over money. Harlow leaned back in his chair thinking about the nature of friendship, betrayal, and the prices people paid for revenge. The case would haunt him, he knew. Not because it was unsolved, Mitchell would be caught eventually, but because of what it revealed about human nature. 2 friends had gone into the mountains. Only one had known it was a trap. But in the end, both had been victims of something larger than either of them understood. A man obsessed with testing the limits of human connection had taken their flawed friendship and weaponized it, turning their bond into a torture device more effective than any physical restraint. And somewhere out there, Garrett Mitchell was still free, possibly planning his next experiment on the fragile threads that connected people to each other. Harlow closed the document and returned to the active investigation board. Mitchell's photo stared back at him, a man with cold eyes and a scar between his thumb and index finger. "I'll find you," Harlow said to the photo. "No matter how long it takes." Because in the end, that's what he did. He found the missing, caught the guilty, and provided what justice he could to the victims. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't always enough. But it was something. And sometimes something was all anyone could hope for. 3 years later, Garrett Mitchell was apprehended at a border crossing in Montana, attempting to enter Canada with false documents. His capture made national news, and the trial that followed became a media sensation. Mitchell was convicted on multiple charges, including kidnapping, false imprisonment, and assault. He received a sentence of 45 years without the possibility of parole. At the sentencing hearing, both Aiden Cross and Mason Clark gave victim impact statements. Aiden spoke of the lasting trauma, the nightmares, the difficulty trusting anyone. Mason spoke of the guilt that consumed him, the knowledge that his actions had set everything in motion, the impossibility of forgiveness. Mitchell himself said nothing, showing no remorse, no explanation, no acknowledgement of his crimes beyond a clinical admission that yes, he had done what they accused him of. After the sentencing, Aiden and Mason found themselves in the courthouse hallway. The first time they'd been in the same room since the rescue. They looked at each other across the crowded space. Two men bound by history and trauma, separated by betrayal and time. Neither approached the other. Neither spoke. After a long moment, they each turned and walked in opposite directions, disappearing into their separate lives. Some friendships, once broken, could never be repaired. Some wounds never fully healed. And some betrayals left scars that no amount of justice could erase. Detective Harlow watched them leave from his position by the courtroom doors. He'd done his job. The case was closed. The guilty were punished. The victims were safe. But as he walked out into the Colorado sunshine, he couldn't shake the feeling that everyone involved, Aiden, Mason, even Mitchell in his own twisted way, had been victims of something fundamental about human nature. The desire for revenge, the failure of communication, the ease with which trust could be weaponized. Two friends had gone missing in Colorado. 6 weeks later, they were found alive but forever changed. The case had an ending but not a resolution, because some questions couldn't be answered by investigations or trials. Questions like, how much betrayal can friendship survive? How far will someone go for revenge? And what happens when the line between victim and accomplice becomes so blurred that neither designation fully captures the truth? Harlow didn't have answers to those questions. He suspected no one did. But as he drove back to Boulder, past the mountains where it had all happened, he understood that the case would stay with him forever. Not as a professional triumph, but as a reminder of how complicated human relationships could be, and how easily they could be destroyed when someone decided that punishment was more important than understanding.